Defenders of the Earth.
I got started with the Defenders of the Earth at Marvel Studios by being actually assigned to another show. And that show had some difficulties getting off the ground with other problems, not so much with people, but it's just that it dragged. And so I was asked by one of the company personnel could I switch and go on to this show, Defenders of the Earth? And I said, didn't bother me at that point. It was fine. So at that point they switched me on to Defenders of the Earth. There was a couple other directors and people involved in it, but we all then got involved as a collective unit working on this to get the show out. 65 episodes is a lot of episodes. My assignment was we would take the scripts as they come in as a director, since they were already pre-written, a lot of the shows, and take it from the animation direction and watch do the backgrounds, get those coordinated, get the storyboard work done, get all the incidental models done, all the background colors had to be processed through each director, myself included, for that particular episode. So there's many, many people who were working on the show, and my job then at that point was to watch over and be the responsible party to make sure that we got the show done, one, on time, and two, in the correct quality that they were asking for, and to watch for all the problems that come up in an animation production and solve them. I had to learn about the characters and their background and history. And so, you sort of have to read the bio and understand where these characters are, why they are, and, it's a comic strip, sure, but for animation, we still had to have that inside us to know how these characters reacted, talked, and how they were supposed to be animated. I was lucky enough to acquire one of the original comic strip panels, a Sunday page of the original Flash Gordon's comic strip, which was drawn in the 40s and in 30s and 40s. I don't know exactly the date that I have the strip. And I have it framed, it's sitting in my office, it sits behind me. So and I've had that piece for a long, long period of time. So when this all sort of evolved that I went to work for Marvel as a director and got onto this show, I think Flash Gordon probably was my favorite because there was some tie into how I was looking at it, and I had a original Alex Raymond comic strip, and I had, a little understanding of the characters. When we got into the other characters, and that they were developed primarily for the show, the Defenders of the Earth, they weren't always comic strip characters that worked effectively all the time. They were there, but I think they were developed a little bit further for the show from what I remember. And they were fun because you could do a little bit more to them. I don't think their background and history were as strong as the other characters. So, when you wanted to have them do something, you could have them do it, and you probably didn't have to worry about, well, did I step over their boundaries of what they do or don't do. All great shows have great villains, so getting to the nasty ones were always fun. You could also tell in storyboards coming through when the guys would draw the storyboards. When the villains come up, they would put them in their poses and the angles, and they would just make them mean and nasty looking, and always do the ways that you perceive villains should be. They're bad people, and so it was always fun to see that. Well, I felt very honored to be called and asked to come in and do an interview on a program that I worked on 20 years ago. So somewhere along the line it has legs, and it stayed around for a while. This had a following of people, if you want to call it a legacy or whatever, but comic books, comic strips, the toys are things that may have been produced over the years, and now to have a show done with 65 episodes, I feel honored to be asked to do this.
Defenders of the Earth. Defenders of the Earth.
comic strips were read by millions. They were the television of the day, and the stars of the comic strips like Hal Foster and Milton Caniff and Roy Crane were as famous as Tom Cruise is now. The comic strips were so familiar that everybody would recognize the characters. When comic strips started out, they were mostly slapstick humor, so that you had Mutt and Jeff and Bringing Up Father and Blondie and Dagwood. The first adventure strips were Tarzan, which was drawn by Hal Foster and written by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and Buck Rogers. Buck Rogers was an outer space adventurer and was the very first comic strip about an outer space adventurer, and was very popular. So naturally, the Hearst Corporation wanted an outer space adventurer for their Sunday papers. And they came up with Flash Gordon, a polo star and dashing romantic athlete who is kidnapped by the evil Dr. Zarkov and whisked off to the planet Mongo, where he fights Ming the Merciless. This happened in 1934 and was tremendously popular. The artist for the Flash Gordon comic strip was Alex Raymond, and did absolutely gorgeous work. Mandrake and Lothar, and also the Phantom, were created by a writer named Lee Falk, who wrote both of those comic strips for more than 40 years. An amazing record. In comic books, you can always have Superman and Batman team up, because Superman and Batman are both published by DC Comics. But it's much harder to get Superman to team up with Spider-Man, because they're published by different companies. Similarly, in comic strips, it's easy to get Mandrake the Magician and Flash Gordon and the Phantom, and of course Mandrake's friend Lothar, to team up, because they're all distributed by the same syndicate, King Features Syndicate. It would be much harder, in fact it would probably be impossible, to get Buck Rogers to join the Defenders of the Earth. In the Defenders of the Earth animated series, the setting is moved from the present day into the future. And so you can have Flash Gordon, who of course is a spaceman, meet with Mandrake and Lothar, who in the comic strip are in the present day, and the Phantom, who people believe to be immortal. But the Phantom is not immortal. The Phantom is an ordinary man, and as each Phantom dies, he summons his son to his deathbed and passes the skull ring and the costume on to his son, so that the tradition of the immortal Phantom, enemy of pirates everywhere, is preserved. In Defenders of the Earth, you not only have the adult adventurers, but you also have their children carrying on the legacy. In the comic strip, even though Mandrake eventually married his longtime girlfriend Narda, they don't have any children. But in the Defenders of the Earth, since it's set in the future, they have an adopted child, Kashin. Lothar has married his girlfriend, as he did in the strip, and they have a son, Lothar Jr. And believe it or not, at long last, Flash Gordon and Dale Arden have gotten married, at least in the year 2026, and they have a son named Rick. The first Flash Gordon strip by Alex Raymond was in 1934, and the strip is still running today, though it is in reruns, I'm sad to say. Many of the very best Flash Gordon stories were written by a writer named Harry Harrison, who's perhaps best known as the author of The Stainless Steel Rat. Because I love these stories so much, I published them in a magazine, Comics Review, and I'm now publishing the Harry Harrison Flash Gordon, and it's quite different from the Flash Gordon of the 1930s. I'm, as a big fan of these characters, very happy that the DVDs of Defenders of the Earth and Flash Gordon are bringing them to a new generation of viewers. Of course, I hope that a whole new generation of readers will want to seek out the comic strips of Flash Gordon in my monthly magazine, Comics Review.
Defenders of the Earth. Defenders. Defenders of the Earth.
My involvement in Defenders of the Earth came about in a kind of interesting way. I'd been working on a feature film for a Korean company in Seoul, and I came back to Los Angeles after about a year of living abroad and wound up working on a Marvel production that this guy was producing in his own shop in town. And through that I met Lee Gunther, who was the VP of production at Marvel, and he said he had this series, and he invited me over to have a look at it and hired me on the spot. So I got involved. The series was in development, but it was kind of all over the place in terms of where it was settling down. It hadn't quite come home yet. And they just brought me in, and I took it on as 65 half hours from the day I was introduced to it. The series was initially designed to bring the kids of the superheroes in to see if they could attract kids to the original characters, Flash Gordon, Phantom, Lothar, and Mandrake. They brought the kids in to attract a kid audience, to get to know those characters and to get to know the main superheroic characters. And there was some initial changes in the beginning as it went through development. There was a daughter of Flash Gordon who became a son, and then there was a son of Phantom who became a daughter. So the series went through a lot of developmental changes, but the involvement of the kids was to just bring a kid viewpoint into a series with superheroes. Defenders of the Earth presented an opportunity to the writers on the series, because it was not a network series, that the creative overview came from the studio itself and not from a network executive. So we were allowed to take some liberties with the series. There were issues of violence that are always an issue in a children's cartoon, which we didn't overplay, but there was weaponry and things that we used and we could get away with that may not have been acceptable to standards and practices at a network. And because it was syndicated, you generally at that point you're selling a series through, and it had a toy line and all of the usual things in place. So it didn't affect the series in a negative way, and I don't think it was exploitive in that way at all. But we were able to take some of those liberties with it. It was quite exciting to work with characters that had been around for so long. I mean, Flash Gordon was coming out of my parents' generation. Phantom was, in way back, I think in the early 1900s, Lee Falk developed that character. So there was an historical context with Flash Gordon and Mandrake and the Phantom, all because they had been around for so long, had never really been exploited to the extent that they were being in this series. So it was really kind of neat to look back into their history, find out what was new and exciting, or how to bring new and exciting parts of their history into the series while exploiting their past history. And they are historical characters; they always will be. And it's nice to work on something like that has an historical past. The fan base for this series at the time it came out was really targeted to what they call an 8 to an 11 audience. It was embraced well by them. It had a good run in syndication, and we got some great feedback. Introducing young kids to these characters was great, and I think that it played well in the crowd that we were targeting it to. The release of this series on DVD, Defenders of the Earth, I think it's going to touch a lot of people, because it still has a baby boomer kind of intelligence going on, and people are aware of Flash Gordon, they're aware of Phantom, there's been feature films, there's been other series, and I think it will skew to an audience of older, of the baby boomer generation, because they're going to see something that has characters they know. They know the history of them, they know they're historical. I think they're going to be excited to see that these characters are out, and in a situation where they're going to be digitally remastered and will look fantastic. The whole development and the creation of Defenders of the Earth as a series, there was a phenomenal group of talent on the show. We had some of the best designers in the genre. We had some great directors, and I think that just in terms of where it stood as a series, it was a little groundbreaking for the time, and it had a lot of historical value, but it had great characters and the writing was great. And I think it turned out to be a really wonderful, character-driven superheroic show, which is often rare in this world.
Defenders of the Earth. Defenders. Defenders of the Earth.
I was doing a lot of television stuff in Hollywood. I mean, I've done over 500 television shows. But when the opportunity came up, I would do voiceovers for commercials. And when my agent suggested doing voices for animation, I said I'd like to, because I feel I have a versatile voice and I do lots of kinds of voices. And it's been fun for me. I went in to see the producer, and he said, "What are you going to do?" And I said, "Well, I think I'll do a voice like this. I think it's strong and mysterious." He said, "I like it. Okay." So that's The Phantom. They were a bunch of talented people and talented directors, and they were very conscientious and hardworking, and it was fun. And it was a great break for me, because doing on-camera stuff, acting, and then going to do animation and not having to be in front of the camera, but just your voice, was a kick. I enjoyed it very much. That's where I met Loren Lester. He was playing Rick Gordon, the Flash Gordon's son. We spent a year and a half doing 65 shows, and I got to know him, and I thought, this is a very nice young fella. I think you should meet my daughter. Now, my daughter is a very beautiful girl, so I wasn't trying to palm off, somebody who was unattractive or she couldn't have a date or anything. And anyway, as time passed, I got to like him a lot. And I remember he used to do photographs. He'd come around, he'd show me and shooting me and doing animation with the earphones on, and he'd present these pictures to me of myself, and I thought that was very nice. So about near the end of the time that we were finished shooting, we had a wrap party. And it was a nice wrap party, and my wife came, and she met Loren, and she thought, this is a nice young man too. And I made my move. I called Loren on the phone. I said, "Loren, do you like boys or girls?" He said, "I like girls." I said, "Would you like to take out my daughter, Kelly?" He said, "Just a moment." And he went away for about 3 minutes, and I said, where is he going? What happened? He went to look at our Christmas card that we send out every year with the whole family. And there's my daughter. And he came back and he said, "Yes." Well, they went out the first date, and they hit it off real great. And that is about 18 or 19 years ago. And they've been married all that time, and I have 3 fantastic grandchildren, 3 little girls. So Loren turned out to be a gem. I started out in films being very heroic. My first film was a picture called Friendly Persuasion with Gary Cooper, where I was the Civil War lieutenant in love with Gary Cooper's daughter, and I was very heroic. The same thing in Black Orchid with Tony Quinn and Sophia Loren. I've had ups and downs, and of course I was Reverend Snow in Three's Company, Chrissy's father, so I've been very good and funny. But I had been locked in for a long time on playing a bad guy. I've played a lot of bad guys, boy. A lot of bad guys. And someday I hope put a reel together of all the ways I have been killed. I have been thrown off buildings, I've been shot, I've been stabbed, I've been poisoned, I've been murdered, I've been blown up, I've been drowned. And successively, if they put that together, it would be very funny. Playing the Phantom was a good guy, a heroic figure, a noble figure, and I enjoyed it. And I think it's kind of memorable in terms of folklore of doing animation, because it's a very specific character, And I was sort of, I feel gratified that my voice is that history. I think it's timeless. I really do. And I've seen a few segments of the show again, and I think it holds up very, very well. And the shows are interesting and very well made, and the characters are very strong. I mean, you have Mandrake, you have the Phantom, you have Flash Gordon. That's incredible. These are memorable characters from the comics. I mean, when I was growing up, and here they are animated and forever on DVD.
Defenders of the Earth. Defenders. Defenders of the Earth.
I've been a voice actor since the beginning of my career, so about the age of 16 or 17. So quite a number of years now. I was very lucky because at the time that I did that, you could be in different parts of the business. You could be a commercial actor and a TV on-camera actor and a voiceover actor. It's a little more specialized now, but in those days you could be sort of a jack of all trades. I'd say the characters I'm most well known for were on the Batman series. There was 3 incarnations of that show, Batman the animated series and a couple of incarnations after that. And I was Dick Grayson, the voice of Robin, and then I was Nightwing. So Dick Grayson graduated and became his own superhero, and he was called Nightwing and had a lower, deeper voice, you know. And as Robin, he was very much a superhero. What are we gonna do, Batman? You know, that kind of character, which was very much like what I did with Defenders of the Earth. Rick Gordon's voice was pretty much my own, but kind of amped up, a lot of energy behind it. And I think this show really led me into the Batman series because they were very close together, done very close together, and I think one spawned the other one, for me anyway, in my career. I think what led me into this series, Defenders of the Earth, was the show I did before that, which was G.I. Joe, and I had a recurring role on that. I played the character Barbecue, who was from Maine. And so I would say things like, well, we're gonna have to stop Cobra. You know, while everyone else was screaming, I was sort of like the low-key guy from Maine. And I think it was the same casting person or the same director or something, I can't quite remember, but they brought me in for the audition for Defenders of the Earth. And then I think there was a couple of more auditions after that, callbacks, and then finally I landed the part of Rick. In Defenders of the Earth, the character got to go through a whole lot of, you know, dangerous and psychological adventures. So there was a lot of wonderful acting things that we were given an opportunity to do with the scripts. Most of the time when you're hired for a cartoon series, you have to do at least 3 voices. And so besides doing the voice of Rick, there would always be incidental parts of a guard, a villain, you know, an alien, a robot, you know. So that was fun too, because every show we knew we would be doing at least 3 different characters. We had a great cast. These were just wonderful actors. The actor who played Ming became a very good personal friend of mine, Ron Feinberg. And he was actually a giant of a man who could have played Ming on camera. I mean, he was just a giant man and a big, booming voice, but, you know, off camera, funny man and, you know, a gentle person, even though he's playing such a villain. I guess the person I have fondest memories of is Peter Mark Richman, who played the Phantom. By jungle law, the ghost who walks. We used to make fun of his voice, it was fun. But I have such fond memories of him because he introduced me to my wife, and it was his daughter, and we got married, and we've been married for 20 years. There's this one line that Peter Mark would always say as the Phantom, which was, by jungle law, the ghost who walks calls forth the power of 10 tigers. And we would all take turns doing that. That was really fun. Pete Renaday, who played Mandrake, a very elegant guy in real life. He could have played that part on camera as well. And terrific actor. And Lou Richards, who played my father, he and I were almost the same age. So it was pretty funny. The funny thing when we'd start rehearsal every day is that we would do the lines, but the director would read the descriptions in between. And he was a very funny, very cynical guy. And he would sit there and he would say, okay, now Let's see, you guys are sitting in a helicopter and it looks like a skull, and it's about to crash. All right, say your line.
Is that fun?
Any animated show starts, of course, with the storyboards and the script and the concepts and the creation of the characters. But what brings it to life are the actors who do the voices. And as you know, they animate the shows after they record the voices. So the voices are an inspiration for the animation that takes place later, and also, I think, an inspiration for the people who actually wrote it and created the show. So it's a huge part of the process, sort of in the middle of between creation and finished product. You have the voiceover actors who bring a lot to the process. Nowadays, you know, when you record an animated show, you're very lucky if you wind up with only maybe 1 or 2 other members of the cast in the same room with you. What was great about this show was that all of us were in the same room. I'd say probably 90% of the time. So it was done more like a radio show, and we could all bounce off of one another and pick up cues from one another in a way that I don't think you get the same quality when you're alone. And a lot of shows we do now, we do all by ourselves or with only one other person. I'm always fascinated with when you go on the internet and if you do a search on yourself or a search on a job you've done, and there are people out there with websites who are very interested in, you know, following. A lot of these projects have followings I didn't know about. A lot of people are interested in obscure and cult things that we did years and years ago, but are big fans of it. I hadn't seen the shows in a long time. I guess it's 20 years ago now. So I went hunting for them because I really wanted to see the show. So I went into a store that sells things for less than $1. Let's put it that way, one of those stores. And there was, you know, cassettes from Defenders of the Earth. I thought, this is great. And I scooped them up and I brought them home and I was so excited because I hadn't heard this in a long time. And I popped it in and it was in Spanish. So I literally have not seen or heard these shows for 20 years, and I'm looking forward to seeing the DVD because I really have not seen these shows for a long time. The legacy of this show is going to be, you know, I think a lot of people grew up with this show, they're interested in this show, but haven't seen it in a long time. So I think it's gonna be great to re-release it and have people see it again.
Defenders of the Earth. Defenders. Defenders of the Earth.
I was working at Marvel Productions with my partner, Dick Robbins. We were head story editors of the studio at that time. We had just been finishing up the first year of the Transformers, and Margaret Lesh, who was the executive producer there, asked us to come in on Defenders of the Earth and be story editors of that series for the 65 episodes they were doing. The show was actually created before we got in on the show. It was being developed by Larry Parr, who was a friend of mine, another writer who was probably going to story edit the show. He went on to something else, and we got brought in when the show was up and developed and running to go. So we just wrote the pilot episode, Escape from Mongo, and we just went on from there and story edited 65 episodes. I've been a story editor, I guess, with Dick Robbins originally at Hanna-Barbera before we went to Marvel, and I worked on Scooby and Scrappy-Doo and some other shows, The Little Rascals with Dick Robbins, and then when we moved to Marvel, we did the Transformers. So when we went to Defenders of the Earth, we were pretty much doing the same types of jobs we were doing before, which is basically coming up with the storylines, assigning them to writers, and developing them into scripts so that we would have at least one script every week. For this show, we actually had to do scripts on a faster rate. I think we had to do like 2 a week, so we did have to have some assistants. Tony Pastor Jr. and Barbara Kane, his assistant, also helped story editing the scripts. We were all sort of frantically trying to get material out into production as quickly as possible. We would accept premises from writers and read their ideas for stories, select which ones we wanted to use, and then the writers would work with us on coming up with outlines for the stories, and finally finishing into scripts which included all descriptions of all the dialogue and the activity and the backgrounds. Anything that you would actually see on the screen had to be described and then put down into script form. And at that point, then it would go to the storyboard artists to represent into illustrations. I enjoyed the show because we were working with classic characters, Phantom, and Flash Gordon, and Mandrake the Magician. And it's always a treat to work with classic characters that someone else has created. And you want to, of course, do them justice and make sure that they're true to their characters, and yet you want to bring them into modern times and really make it fun for the audience to watch them and share in their adventures again. The show was developed originally with a different staff. Larry Parr was originally in charge of developing the show, and under his watch, actually, some of the characters were different genders. As I recall, Jeddah, the daughter of the Phantom, was originally going to be a son of the Phantom, and I believe that Rick, the son of Flash Gordon, was going to be a daughter. They already had models drawn of these characters, and they had to go back and change them and rewrite them. A lot of developmental issues were already taken care of by the time I came in on the show with Dick. I never read any of the comic strips for Flash Gordon, so I can't really tell you what elements were actually in the show. Mostly what I know Flash Gordon is from the motion picture serials of the 30s or 40s. And then, of course, they did a feature-length picture, Flash Gordon, I believe around the same time, around 1980. So I don't really know what elements we had to remain true to. We could be a little freer to develop what we wanted to with him. Flash Gordon is kind of the square-jawed hero of the show, and we enjoyed giving him lopsided phrases, and such as easy as cake, or, well, he would say, yeah, easy as cake, or piece of pie, rather than piece of cake and easy as pie. Probably my favorite character was Mandrake the Magician. I just really enjoyed the fact that he had a different sensibility than the other characters. He was more of a gentleman, the way that he dressed and expressed himself, and since he could do some sort of hypnotic magic things, he had better powers, I think, than the others, and we had more interesting uses for him. The Phantom. The Phantom was an interesting character as well, too. He was created by Lee Falk, and we had contact with him as well, but he didn't really have any direct contribution to the series, other than just initially giving us his blessing for that. I enjoyed the fact that the Phantom had a generational quality to him that he was passing on to Jeddah, and we got a lot of stories out of the fact that Jeddah was going to be the next Phantom, and that there had been Phantoms before this one, and there'll be Phantoms afterward. We got to use that aspect of his character in the plots of several of the episodes, which made it very interesting for the fans. I did get to name my dog Kisa, which is named after the pet that Jeddah owns, the jaguar that she has. So that was the one lasting thing I took from the show, is that I got to name my dog Kisa. Ming the Merciless. He was really fun to write for. He did say a lot of stereotypical things like, you fools, or invaders, alert, or whatever he would say. There were just dialogue that sometimes was fun to write for him, and sometimes it was just sort of over the top. He was not as active, obviously, as his minions. His minions could actually do more. He had to actually pose more. But occasionally he did get into the action as well, and that was fun to do. But we tried to make him as imperious as we possibly could, and so he, being a very traditional classic villain, we had a lot of fun working with him. My friend David Wise wrote 14 or 15 of the episodes, and he really was probably the top writer of the series. Most of his episodes, I think, were my favorites. I really enjoyed reading his scripts, and for the most part I didn't have to change too much when we actually went to production. So he had the right quality of drama and comedy and action adventure that the series really deserved, and I think he really did a good job. Another one that he did was, and I can't remember the name of it, was the one in which the Phantom was thought to have been killed accidentally, and Jeddah was going to have to take over his duties as the Phantom. And that was a very powerful story. We were very concerned at the time about whether we could actually show the assumed death of a character. At that time, Margaret Lesh had hired 2 child psychologists to review the scripts to let us know whether the themes involved in these scripts would be too mature or too troublesome. We did have a lot of opportunity for the use of mature themes in these shows. We showed probably more violence than other shows. There were illustrations of guns being fired, and they weren't necessarily all ray guns, which at that time, ray guns were considered safer than obviously guns with bullets. However, the child psychologists gave this their approval, and we could show this episode as long as we showed that the Phantom was not actually dead and that he was going to come back to life. So, you know, it may seem like a small thing, but it was a very, very big issue at the time. And I enjoyed it. It was a good episode as it came out. I think there was a lot of powerful emotion in it, as I recall. I worked with my partner, Dick Robbins. Dick was actually a television writer from a previous generation that found himself in the animation field. Dick was invaluable to me because when we wrote a script together, he would usually write the first draft and I would get to do just the rewrite. And he would actually face the blank page, which I think is probably the biggest fear of any writer. He liked to throw in anything that he thought might be fun for young people, but he didn't always have the greatest idea of what young people might enjoy, so I sometimes had to take things out. But I really enjoyed working with him. I worked with him for at least 7 or 8 years. We did the Transformers together, as well as the Little Rascals, Monchichis. Yes, Monchichis, we remember that show. And I enjoyed working with him a lot. I enjoyed working with Tony Pastor Jr. He worked with Margaret Lesh, and he also did some of the story editing of the scripts, and he was a lot of fun to work with. He always had a lot of energy, had his own projects going at all times, and I don't think we could have done the show without him. I think really he had a lot of input on the show and how it looked at the end, and I think he should be credited for that. When I look at the show now, there's a lot of good animation, a lot of effects that were very technical for the time. Nowadays we have computer-generated graphics and animation that really is outstanding and looks much better than what we could do in 1986. But for 1986, it had a lot of quality to it. There was a lot of good animation, there was a lot of good color. I believe that the stories themselves were both exciting adventures, and yet they had some family elements to them, some human elements that the characters could actually interact with each other, and as father or son, or children and parents, the generations, and so I think it was a good mix of that. I was very proud to work on this show because I thought it was fun for kids, and I thought it wasn't something that was condescending to them either. It just had a nice mix of all the elements. I'm amazed there are fans. I mean, I'm not sure how long this show has been on the air, so I have no idea who's been watching it, or if they're just fans from a long time ago and they're my age or slightly younger than I am. I think that's great that you can remember a show that long. I haven't known any fans personally, so I can't really speak to them, but if you found something in this show to like, well, more power to you.
Defenders of the Earth. Defenders. Defenders of the Earth.
I wrote a lot of Defenders of the Earth. I wrote 15 episodes, which is like almost a quarter of the number of episodes that they did. I was very happy to get on the series for a lot of reasons. Number one, the story editor was Bryce Malek. Bryce is my best friend. We had met on Transformers and we became thick as thieves. He's been best man at both my weddings, the one and then the one that lasted. And I love working with Bryce because he would just pretty much leave me alone. Or if I needed pulling back, he would pull me back. So that was the first reason. The other reason was it was these great characters. Mandrake, the Phantom, Flash Gordon, these are classic, these are the kind of characters you would sell your mother into white slavery to be able to write for. And on top of that, I had known Lee Falk pretty much all my life. He was a family friend. Lee Falk created the Phantom and Mandrake. He was, in fact, I have a Mandrake daily strip from the 60s. My family had known him. I had known him all my life. I had more or less grown up knowing the guy. So I was very excited about writing his characters, and I wanted to make sure I did some episodes that were sort of homage episodes to him. Basically, the supervision on Defenders of the Earth was Bryce, my story editor, the producers above him, and King Features. And King Features, as long as you treated the characters with respect, they were fine. Bryce always let me have my way. Most of the time the producers were too busy to mess with the scripts, with one exception that I will talk about shortly. So we got to do some things on that show that we never, ever, you've never seen on any other cartoon show. My favorite episodes are, there's one called The Sky Band, which is a Phantom show and which actually flashes back to the classic 30s newspaper strip Phantom, since the Phantom is generational, passed down from father to child. And basically what I did was I just took an actual Lee Falk Phantom story called The Sky Band, which was about women Nazi sky pirates, airplane pirates, and made it a backstory to this story about modern day futuristic female space pirates. And the things we got away with in that show, we have loaded real guns being pointed at the camera, which you are not supposed to ever be able to show a real gun with real bullets in it. We have people, the Phantom getting shot point blank in the chest. We have the Phantom and a Nazi woman sucking face in a dungeon. We have the same woman plummeting to her death, and not only do we show it once, we show it 3 times, although, and I have to say that it was only once in the original script. Somebody decided to flash it back. Death, sex, dungeons, Nazis, all sorts of things you're not supposed to be able to do. And the only thing that got cut was the reference to the Nazis. In the original script, I tried to keep it down because I knew it was going to kind of be trouble. And I already felt this script has enough bad. I really thought they were going to kill the script, frankly. But there's a reference where the Phantom says, the Phantom in the 30s says to the leader of the 30s Sky Band, what about your bosses in Germany? And I think that line got cut, and that's as close. We knew we couldn't show a swastika, we couldn't show any of that stuff, so which was fine. And the kids wouldn't understand anyway, so that was no great loss. Another show we did that I really liked was called Flesh and Blood. And that was a Flash Gordon story. And that was about, this is going to contain spoilers. So if you haven't watched this episode yet, turn this off now and go watch it and then come back. There's this group of robot haters, the old racism. This is an old science fiction ploy that the hatred of machines is a stand-in for racism. So, but we stood this on its head a little bit. A paramilitary group, since the show is set in the future, who think that robots are making humanity soft and stealing our souls and all, and are generally bad, who go around committing acts of terrorism, destroying robots. Well, Flash Gordon happens to fall in love with a woman who turns out to be part of this terrorist group. And he's totally dismayed, and they have to go through their whole love story, but then when she says, "You've got to join us," and he realizes what she really is, he dumps her. And he starts thinking about it, and he makes a realization, and what he finds out is, what he realizes is, that this anti-robot group are robots. They are robots that have been programmed so perfectly to think they're human that they've started an anti-robot movement. And there is a scene where where this is revealed, where Flash Gordon walks up to one of the robot guys and says, "I usually find that whatever a person hates most, whatever a person takes the most offense with, is usually what that person is under the surface." And he rips off the guy's chest, and there's robotics underneath. This is the textbook definition of the psychological term of projection, which is basically I attribute my own faults to the people around me, which I do, by the way. And this is pretty deep stuff for a kid's show. And plus it had more making out, because he's making out with a girl who turns out not only to be you know, a member of the group he's sworn to destroy, but she's actually a robot on top of that. And at one point, Flash Gordon's looking very depressed, and he goes, boy, when I make a mistake, I do it in a big way. And again, this character, the female character, dies at the end, even though she's only a robot. There was just outrageous stuff in these series. The other show that I really liked was called The Ghost Walks Again. I loved the script. The end product, unfortunately, was not so good. The basic premise was the Phantom is believed to be dead, and of course we tell the audience 2 seconds later that no, he's really okay, but all of our characters think he's dead. And the Phantom is generational. It's passed down from father to son to father to son, and now from father to daughter. And the story is really about Jeddah, the Phantom's daughter, having to suddenly take on the mantle of the Phantom and live up to all this responsibility, and she's a teenager and she doesn't feel ready for it yet. And it was a very sensitive story. In fact, Bryce Malek told me that this is pretty much before computers. They had a typing pool in Marvel Productions. And the typing pool, as typing pools were in those days, was largely women. And the women had a bet going that this script had been written by a woman because it was so sensitive and the dialogue was so sensitive. But one woman said, it's a David Wise script, guaranteed, because they never saw the author's name. It's a David Wise script, guarantee you. And all those women lost the pool because it was. But that's how, this script had some real depth and sensitivity to it. Well, one of the executive producers, and I think it was Tony Pastor, but I'm not sure. Bryce could probably say for sure. I turned that script in on a Thursday. Bryce was done with it on a Friday, just doing his little polish on it. And it was turned over to Tony Pastor, who had to approve all the final scripts. Normally, Tony's a very busy guy, but he had nothing to do that weekend, apparently. So basically, he spent the weekend taking the script apart and destroying it. And the final product, it's still pretty good. I mean, I just, you know, writers are very sensitive about these things. It just wasn't what I wrote. The final product is not bad, but the script, the original script, was 10 times deeper. It was the first series to be entirely animated in Korea. Korean animation was definitely second to Japanese animation in terms of quality at this time. They were just getting their industry up on the feet. Now the Korean industry is excellent. The Japanese use the Korean industry all the time. But the animation is going to look kind of primitive. But the craft of the artists and designers and writers and story people behind it, I think really shows through. And really look at the stories, because there's some amazing stories in there. And also look at the end credit, because there were some pretty heavyweight artists involved with the design of the show, such as Valentino, who went on to found Image Comics, Alex Nino, who's a great famous designer. The show has a lot to offer. You just have to kind of look through or adjust to the fact that it's a 20-year-old show. It doesn't have the production values of a modern-day show. I'm proudest of, first of all, the fact that I think we really did honor to these great, great heroes, these great characters. They're part of our mythology. Second, I actually did some scripts that had more sophistication and depth and a whole lot of other words that I normally would never use in describing my stuff than your average kids show script. This series, if you look past the animation, which I don't really think is that great, there's problems with characters going off model and whatnot, but if you look through the production values and just look at the raw storytelling in it, you'll see that there's some, I hope, that there's some really good work being done, not just by me, but by other people as well.
Defenders of the Earth. Defenders. Defenders of the Earth.
While I was at Marvel, I was working on G.I. Joe Transformers, and one of the directors or producers, I think it was Rudy Zamora, said he was going to be doing Defenders. And I thought, well, what is Defenders? And he told me, well, it's Flash Gordon and the Phantom. And I said, wait a minute, you got the Phantom in the show? He goes, yeah. I said, you got to sign me up. You got to put me on the show. He says, well, we got Bob Klein. I said, you got Bob Klein? I mean, I had worked with Bob Klein before. So I go, you got to get me on the show. And he says, well, okay, we'll do our best, because at the time I was pretty busy on another show. But the other producer said, sure, take him. I got a chance to board behind Klein and some other great board artists on the show as well. So that was a dream come true to do the Phantom, Flash Gordon, Mandrake. This was a great series. It had a long run, so that was a lot of fun. Too many Icemen were in the show. You constantly had to draw these Icemen over and over again, being blown up, put back together again, reforming. I mean, I had shows where I had maybe 10, 15 Icemen, and that was always a pain to draw that many characters. But I would love to do the jungle stuff with the Phantom. That was just so much fun, and I really enjoyed the space battles. At the time, Star Wars had already come out. We were all trying to do outer space stuff, and that was a lot of fun as well. In Defenders of the Earth, my favorite character always has been, always will be the Phantom. I've always been a big Phantom fan since grammar school. You know, the ghost who never dies and the ghost who always walks has always been one of my favorite characters. So when I heard they were doing Defenders, I fought hard to get on the show. I mean, I've threatened people's lives to get on the show because I wanted to do the Phantom. And I had a chance to do the Phantom quite a bit. On Defenders of the Earth, I got a chance to work with one of my storyboard heroes, which was Bob Klein, Don Manuel, and got a chance to work with them and tried to do the best show that we could. Got a chance to work with comic book illustrator Rick Holberg, who also I'd worked with at other studios. So it was real fun, a great experience to be on that particular show. Not just because I got a chance to work with these artists, but also I got a chance to work on the Phantom and with some great directors. So it was a really good experience. When I heard about the DVD release, I was extremely surprised. It was great. I was waiting for this show to come back. It hasn't been in syndication in, what, 15 years or so? So I'm really looking forward to it. I remember some great memories, some great animation, some great stories. So I'm really looking forward to the release.